My upgrades are Invincible, Chapter 2, Fan Fiction, by Azazyel. I think that I was already developing a bit of a habit. I raided a large trash can in the industrial district, and I fused all the thrown-away slag they threw away into a bunch of leather, so I got a thick hardy square duffel bag that hung on my side that I filled with garbage swords and daggers I made from more debris I got from the trash. Young man, these blades, metals, and craftwork are crude and rather unrefined. I can give you like 500 Valis for the lot of them. The fucking gnome said, trying to obviously cheat me out of money. Look, you damned lawn ornament, I literally saw the same makes of dagger and swords going for that damned price a piece for starter adventures. And this is fucking Orario. If you cannot sell some decent swords to some fresh plucky would-be adventurers, then your shop wouldn't even exist. I retorted, and the small spirit that was an archetype gnome with a long white beard, cone hat, and sweater with long pants, grinned. That's true, human, but you are selling in bulk, hence I get preferential prices. He said cheerfully, and I pointed at the shitty swords at the side that he had marked for literally the same price as the bundle of my swords. Look, just give me a fair deal, or I will just go sell these for scrap metal. I ended bluntly. Why? And he groaned before quoting me a fairer deal. Fine then, I said, taking the money, and as I went to take my bag off the counter, his hand grabbed the said bag with an iron grip that I couldn't shake despite being 3 times the gnome's size. 50 Valis for the bag, he said, grinning with pure white being shown, and I just scowled at the damned greedy gnome. Nope, I am good. I need something to use as a pillow if I cannot find a place to sleep tonight, I said bluntly, and he raised an eyebrow before sighing. Ah. You just arrived in Orario and haven't found a familia, have you? He asked, letting go of the bag, and I threw it over my shoulder. You could say that, I groused, and the gnome snickered before humming in thought before smiling. Well, human, I recommend going to the old temple district. Back when Orario was founded, a lot of the gods wanted to build temples, so there is an entire sub-district of the city that's almost abandoned that you can squat in while you get your feet underneath you, without some rat knifing you between the ribs while you sleep in an alley. He advised me bluntly, and I honestly, after a moment of thought, nodded to his suggestion, with myself turning around and leaving the shop. Sleeping in some kind of alleyway or even spending most of my money on a hotel room or something while I was here made 0 sense. Arriving at the religious district, and on both sides of the road were abandoned church temples and other places of worship that obviously were used in the worship of the gods and goddesses when they descended to Gakai. But with how each and every one of them was clearly abandoned, I wouldn't be surprised if people just realized that the divines were assholes and didn't bother to worship them anymore. Rats, roaches, vermin, I said dryly as I checked out the churches to find out a nicer one to squat in for a while, and I realized that my fusing abilities were needed for the items to actually go into my internal space before I could fuse them. So, while I could even fuse some furniture, but a whole broken down building? Sitting on a fused bench I fixed up to sit on, I looked around this nicer church I picked out, and I realized I couldn't keep count of the rat holes in the damned walls and flooring. There were even birds hanging in the rafters of the church, crying out loudly, and I came to a realization. I am not going to fucking squat here, I said, completely disgusted at the sight of all the filth around me, and I realized that sure, with my fusing abilities I could indeed make pretty potent weapons to sell and whatnot. But in the end, I needed the resources to fuse into better weapons, and I came from a first-world nation in my previous life. I couldn't sleep with the thought of mice and other vermin crawling over my form as I slept. No choice really, I grunted as I stood up to my feet, and I left the church, going back towards the industrial district so I could put Plan B into operation. I was still scared that a god or goddess would see my cheat and fuck with it in order to mess with me. But in the end, I realized that trying to overturn Orario's whole structure and being a solo adventurer was a fool's dream, as although yes, my cheat was great, but it didn't make me some kind of powerhouse from the get-go. A few minutes later, after passing through the throngs of Orario's citizens, I made my way across Orario and arrived at my Plan B, Hephaestus's Familia Mansion. A veritable castle to protect its many valuable weapons and, of course, keep would-be troublemakers out. Seeing a stout dwarf standing in front of the gates of the Familia Mansion, I spoke to him. Excuse me, is it possible that I could speak to Lady Hephaestus for some business I have for large quantities of ingots being brought in? I asked, taking out a small thin plate of steel that I made out of the coal and iron I got out of the trash previously, and the dwarf took the ingot and inspected it for a moment. The carbon content is fine enough and the steel isn't too hard or soft. He muttered as I saw the damn dwarf pinch the wrist-thick ingot in between his thick fingers and said, ingot being compressed a good bit. Not a bad bit of material for the newbies to work with, and you said this is a bulk order? He confirmed, and I nodded. You stay here while I send a runner. He said and opened the gate, and shouted at some guy carrying a couple of boxes into the main building. Oi, Bexy, take this civvy to Lady Hephaestus for some business. The dwarf ordered, and the guy's shoulder slumped before signing with a grudging nod. Well, come on then, I've got to deliver paperwork to the secretaries of the Familia. So it's not too far out of the way. The man, apparently named Bexy, grunted as he led me into the Familia. So, how long have you been part of the Hephaestus Familia? I asked, and snorted and gave me a side-eye before seeing I was asking seriously. Shit, you are really new to Orio, huh? Yeah, top familias like Hephaestus don't normally recruit off the streets unless it's some physical monster like Otter. Normally, it's children of people already in the familia and of course, people that switch familias when they outgrow theirs. The man continued with a shrug. And for Hephaestus, if you aren't a smith, you can't join the familia without going through some lengthy tests, as Lady Hephaestus already has more than 500 members, and that's a lot of foulness to update once every week or two. He said wryly, and I realized the man wasn't actually part of Hephaestus's familia even while working here. Alright, thank you for the advice, I said wryly as a seed of doubt filled me at my hope of getting into the familia even with my cheat. Like seriously, how shitty would it be if Hephaestus was just like, nah, I already got enough people that need me to stab my finger every day. One SEC, let me talk to Lady Hephaestus first. He said, knocking on a door, and I muffledly heard a female voice speak out as he ducked his head in and spoke. Lady Hephaestus, there is a merchant here with samples for steel ingots of decent quality, he is asking to sell. He spoke. Alright, send him in. I heard Hephaestus say with a bit of tiredness in her voice, and then the man moved out of the way while opening the door for me, and as I came into the room, I saw the goddess herself, along with the captain of the Hephaestus Familia, Tsubaki. Hephaestus, even with the large eye patch that covered almost half her face, was still a vision of beauty with her short, messy red hair and single red eye that stared up at me from her desk. Not to mention how her clothes fit so tightly to her voluptuous frame, with the top two buttons on her white dress shirt being unbuttoned and showing some of her cleavage. Tsubaki Kalbrand also had a more voluptuous frame, and combined with her aesthetic being half Amazon and supposedly dwarf, her darker skin contrasted with Hephaestus's pale skin with their eye patches being on opposite sides of their faces. Let me see the sample ingot, Hephaestus said, holding out a hand, and I handed over another same ingot, this one not squeezed and deformed, and for a moment Hephaestus's eyebrows raised before her face went cool. Alchemy? She asked, looking at me with a frown, and I nodded with her snorting. You need to realize that using alchemy on materials will ruin it for the blacksmithing ability in someone's fauna. For whatever reason, the hints of divinity whenever someone uses their alchemy development ability will clash with the divinity that enhances someone with blacksmithing. She explained with a tired sigh as she dropped the ingot onto her desk. Sure, if you yourself had blacksmithing already, you could use those ingots for your own works, but dash. I cut her off softly with a raised hand. I have a special magic that's like alchemy, I guess. But I don't even have a fauna yet. The guild said the familias were already swamped with recruits, so no one was recruiting. I said wryly, and her eye twitched, and she snatched up the ingot of steel that I made. Tsubaki, bend this. She ordered after a moment of inspection, and she tossed the thumb-sized ingot over to her captain, who caught it and without hesitation squeezed it between her fingers like fucking Play-Doh, making my eye twitch at the sight, and apparently the same to Hephaestus as she gaped at the sight of the ingot that got squeezed out. Tsubaki,